overview of how I make predictions on Pooky. I've been playing the platform for a couple of weeks now. I've done reasonably well with this approach. We're looking at now, I think it was at last count, I'd got to about 10% return on investment from the ball within the first 2 weeks. So hopefully there's some value in this, and you can sort of look at how there's an approach that you can apply for yourself when making predictions on the platform. A couple of really sort of quick gameplay factors which I think do play into sort of how decisions are made on the platform is we've got this new match day format that they've introduced. So historically we'd have a match day, like here, for example, match day 16, match day 26 for the Argentinian league, because they're running on different schedules. And you would predict those independently. But now what happens is they're sort of aggregating your points across all of the match days within the game week. And then there's an additional prize pool on top. So you still win your prizes, you win your Matic for getting predictions right within the Brazilian league, for example, or within the Argentinian league. But now you can sort of combine from both and go for the weekly prize pool as well. If we look at sort of where my priorities lie, I've got 2 Pooky Bowls at the moment. So I think this is my Japanese one. Yeah, that's right. So I've got one from the Japanese league from Yokohama. And then I have got another one here from the Brazilian league, which is going to play a huge, huge part in my strategy this week, because as you see here, I'll get a 10% bonus on the Brazilian league and a 20% bonus on my predictions for Internacional. So it does make sense for me to focus on Brazil. And ultimately what sort of comes into the factor here is it's basically 10 points per prediction. So if we go into the Brazilian league this week, if we look, we've got what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is 9. So 9, that's 10 fixtures. So we've got 10 fixtures that I could play in the Brazilian league. Overall this week, I've got 13 predictions that I can make, because the energy comes from the balls that you own. I own 2 balls. I basically get 13. A multiplier on it, I get 13 picks essentially. So if we think about it and we go back to sort of composition of the game week, then there's a few interesting factors here, because this resets on Monday. So I will actually get an opportunity to make some more predictions in this game week once this energy counter resets on Monday. But if we look now, when do the fixtures take place? That's going to be a prioritization for me. If we look at these ones here, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, but really, really early in the morning in my time. So, what I want to do ideally is get those predictions in now and lock those in. And then I can come back to the other predictions that are essentially going to be taking place the following weekend. If we also look in Argentina, what we've got an interesting factor this week is some teams had cup games last week. So their games have been pushed back. So if we look here all the way down the bottom, Tigre are actually playing on Wednesday. Arsenal and Barracas are playing on Wednesday. River Plate, I think they play late in the game week as well. Where are they? Oh, River Plate here. River Plate are on Monday morning, but then Racing are on Tuesday. So all of these games here, Tuesday and Wednesday, I could actually predict with next week's allocation and still fall within the game week. So it makes sense for me really to be prioritizing my picks based on these ones here and the Brazilian ones. Feasibly the Brazilian ones, I could predict either or. But because the ball that I have is Brazilian, it does make sense for me to go to the Brazilian league first. So my strategy this week is going to be, I want to predict all of the Brazilian matches. I want to predict as many Argentinian matches that I can that fall before Monday. And then I'll come back in and predict a bunch more Argentinian matches that fall within game week 30 once I get the reset of my energy on Monday. So if we go back in here then, right, Brazil is going to be the focus. Let's work through and put some predictions in place now. How am I doing them? So I love looking at XG. if you're not familiar, XG is essentially a measure of the quality and quantity of chances that are created by a team. So it can give me an indication, even though I've never watched Bahia or Curitiba or America Mineiro play in my life, I can look at the XG data and I can get a bit of a feel for how these teams play. So what I've done here, I've put it in a spreadsheet just so it's sort of easy for everyone to see and more familiar with everyone. What I'm looking at, let's just zoom this in a little bit so we can see it, is I've got the XG data for the home team and the away team. And what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at the midpoint between what's the XG that you would expect Palmeiras to create at home, and what's the XG that you would expect Fortaleza to give up away. So if we look at it on a very, very simple basis, we would expect Palmeiras to generate in the region of 1.9 expected goals, and we would expect Fortaleza to generate a 1.3 expected goals. And the reason we're doing this is because I'm sort of cross-referencing it. So Fortaleza, if we look at the sort of raw data table, let's go up to, where are they? If we look at Fortaleza in this row, their expected goals average for is different home and away. So Fortaleza typically create 1.99 at home, 1.59 away. But if we go back to the prediction, you see that the prediction is 1.31. And the reason that is because we're accounting for the strength of the Palmeiras defense. Palmeiras are a relatively strong team within the league, so you wouldn't expect Fortaleza's average to be consistent with the stronger teams in the league and the weaker teams in the league. So by cross-referencing the XG created for one and the XG against for another, you can kind of get a gauge for what do you expect the quality and quantity of chances to be for this team in this given matchup, considering the strength of the opposition and whether they are playing at home or away. Another little factor I've just put in here, just as a guide for making predictions, is the variance. So what we're looking here is we're looking at the difference between the amount of expected goals that Palmeiras create per game and their average goals per game. So what we have here is a minus 2.7 score, which means that Palmeiras typically create enough XG for 1.9 goals, but they only score around 1.7, 1.63. So what we're sort of seeing here is I want as small a number as possible. Like here, Flamengo, for example, 0.06. The smaller the number, the more confident I can be in this prediction. So Flamengo, for example, you would expect Flamengo, to produce the amount of goals they score to be fairly consistent with their expected goals. Whereas like Vasco da Gama down here, their expected goals per game in this match, we would expect 1.81, but actually they've massively underperformed their expected goals. So, they score on average, what's that? 1.81 minus 1.2. It's like basically 0.6 goals a game, but they're expected to score 1.81. And that's really important when you consider predictions because, if a team is significantly underperforming their expected goals, then actually a prediction of 2 goals here might not stand. I don't necessarily want to play, 2-1 as my prediction when we know that Vasco have a history of significantly underperforming their expected goals. So I think let's go and have a look at this. And I think let's just lock in some predictions now and sort of see it. I think how I would interpret this is I think we can be reasonably confident that there is a good chance of Palmeiras scoring 2. We cannot be as confident because of the scoring variance of Fortaleza scoring 1. So in this scenario, I would probably go for 2-0 as a best guess outcome for this match. So if we go across to Pooky, let's take Palmeiras Fortaleza, and we're going to go 2-0, and we're going to lock in that score. What's happening now is that it's going to show us what the points it would expect to give us if this comes in. So if 2-0 is the exact score, I would get 240 boosted points, because it's taking the composition of points from over here, and then it's applying the little multipliers that I've got based on the rarity of the ball and the season and the league and all that other stuff. So I'd expect to get 155 base points for 240, which tells you that Palmeiras beating Fortaleza 2-0 at home is a fairly likely outcome based on how Pooky are calculating this. Like, if, for example, just to show you how this differs, let's go and say we want Fortaleza to win 7-0 away. Really, really unlikely. And as you see, what's happened here is the boosted points and the base points have just jumped up massively because this is such an unlikely prediction. So the way that I am predicting is safe, right? It's kind of a safe approach to giving it the best guess based on the data that I have available and the time that I was sort of willing to put into making these predictions. Like, I could do a lot more sophisticated approach, but I'm just sort of getting a feel for the game, and I just sort of, let's start off simple and see how we go from there and see like what the efforts and the returns are. But another strategy, if you want to employ it, could be just go bold. Like, Palmeiras might massively rotate and Fortaleza might win 1-0, for example. Right? And in that scenario, you would get 2 times the amount of boosted of points than I would have got for my relatively safe Palmeiras winning 2-0 at home. So there's just a point or a hint here. Is like the strategy can really play into this in sort of how you want to approach it. Like, I approach it with sort of safe, consistent picks. If you want to go for a couple of Hail Marys and then see if those come in, you can do. It's like a completely different approach. But understanding how these like points are generated, and the fact that it's not a case of just getting the accurate score, it's about the likelihood of that score coming in will impact the amount of points you get as well. So like, let's lock that prediction in as an example. If we go back to the sheet, let's just take one. Let's take one of the really high variance ones as an example, right? So Vasco versus Atletico Paranaense. Vasco have a really, really good expected goals at home, but they've just not been scoring. They've really, really been struggling to convert. So I actually wouldn't be that confident that they will even get 1 goal in this scenario. Whereas I think you can be confident that Atletico Paranaense would get 1. Typically they are the stronger team. There is less variance between their expected goals and their actual goals. So I think in this scenario, I would probably just add a little bit of a counterpoint onto this, where and say, look, on the sort of pure XG rating, we maybe expect 2-1 or 1-1. I actually think this could end up being a away win 2-0 in the favor of Atletico Paranaense. So I'm going to go back over to Pooky and I'm going to lock in. I think I'm going to lock in 1-0 in this scenario. Let's see how likely this one is. Yeah, fairly likely based on the amount of boosted points I'll get. So yeah, I think let's just lock that one in. That's again sort of one of the more safe predictions. If we want to go for a bit of a wild prediction, then what I think is interesting, I'm not going to lock it in now because I'm going to save this for later in the week when I get the reset. River versus Rosario. Right. So if we look at this, we kind of expect potentially River to win 2-1 away, or 1-1, 2-1 is probably the most likely outcome in this scenario. They've both got quite a low scoring variance. But what is fascinating about this prediction is that this is taking the data for the whole of the season, and the season is almost over. So River have locked up the title. They've got nothing left to play for. Their focus now is the Copa Libertadores. and they've got a Copa Libertadores game in midweek following this. So the chance of River Plate rotating this weekend is incredibly high. So we've got to add a bit of football knowledge on top of the pure data here, in saying like the pure data can give us a guide, but I know that River Plate are not going to play their strongest 11 this week. So I'm actually going to go in this scenario, I'm going to go for a Rosario win. And like, let's go and see what a Rosario win would get us. Because I imagine it's going to be a bit more than the 100 points we just would have got for a safe prediction back in Brazil. So if we go down to, where is it? Rosario versus River. Let's go for a 2-0 Rosario home win. So even say a 2-1 Rosario home win. So yeah, I think River not scoring is probably fairly unlikely. But Rosario winning is more likely. So if you look at this here, I'm getting almost 50% more points for this outcome if this happens than say, maybe River winning, River winning 2-0. Again, I don't think that's likely, because I think Rosario can score. But I think it's just really, really important to consider the context of when you're making predictions. And it's like, data can point us in the right direction, but I think it's about, augmenting that with an understanding of, what do you think is going to happen in the match? Like, are there players injured? Are teams likely to rotate? Because that kind of negates the data that you would have over the course of the season. And I think in the way that Pooky calculates the points that you will get for the prediction, having a blend of safe bets and sort of the more unpredictable results, if you can nail one or two of those unpredictable results, then you're likely to see yourself very high up the leaderboard. But yeah, hopefully that helped today. Thank you for tuning in. Please drop us a like, comments, questions. See you next time.